After the end of Naruto Part 1 in Chapter 238, we're given a select few chapters that focus on Kakashi's ascension to Jonin and how he became the ninja he is today. Introduced to new characters like the future 4th Hokage Minato Namikaze, Obito Uchiha, and another teammate of his, a medic ninja named Rin, these chapters are placed differently than when they actually are adapted into the anime. Adapted as a simple 2-part episode series placed shortly after Sasuke's finding of Jugo, it's sort of a weird spot. In the manga, this serves as a nice prequel to the franchise as it helps establish characters for people we'd eventually come to put up with for virtually the rest of the manga. We get to see Minato's analytical ability and just how feared he was in the war, which makes Naruto's learning of the Rasen Shuriken something he could not do all the more impressive. We get introduced to Obito, who is just Kakashi's underwhelming Uchiha teammate, but would give him one of the lines he told the Team 7 extremely early on in the series, as well as his Sharingan, and would then go on to, in Part 2, become one of the biggest shinobi terrorists the world has ever seen. We also get to see Rin, who at this point doesn't have too much of a character besides being Obito's love interest while she's interested in Kakashi, but later becomes an extremely important piece in Obito's story and begins his ascension into the dark side. We get to see Kakashi as a completely different person. He's not the cool, laid-back guy he is in Part 1. He's quite frankly a dick and just happens to be a good ninja, but not without sufficient reasoning. He's put on this path because someone he looks up to, that being his father, was shamed into unaliving himself due to straying away from that path. This is very much so Kakashi's story, and almost everyone here is extremely important to not just his story, but the story of Naruto as a whole. After these chapters end, we're introduced to almost an entirely new world of Naruto. This part is going to be almost twice as long as the last one, filled with tons more reveals, more plot twists, stronger ninja, blah blah blah, everything you could want out of a sequel. But there is also a time skip to get us to this point. This can vary from source to source. Most places cite that this time skip was anywhere from 2 years to 3 years. I'm going to go in the middle here and just say it was more than 2 years, since that's what's said in the original manga, and it also lines up with the most timeline wise, since Naruto Part 1 ended with Naruto being 13 and Part 2 begins with him being 15. But why do a time skip in the first place? And if there has to be a time skip, why make it 2 years? Could this story not be the same one given only a 6-month difference, even a 3-month difference? That's some of what I'm going to be going over in today's video. It's important to make clear that this is not a judgment on whether or not Shippuden is better than Naruto Part 1. But before we get started, I'd ask if you could leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps the channel out a lot, and I'd obviously very much appreciate it. Before getting started determining whether or not the time skip was needed, let's meet all of our characters again for the first time in 2 years, starting with Naruto. Naruto is still seemingly a goofball, but at least with a bit more maturity. This is shown off with his outfit. Back in Part 1, Naruto wore pants that showed his ankles with rolled up cuffs, and the same with his wrist on his jacket, rolled up cuffs showing his wrist. In Part 2, these are no more, with Naruto getting higher top footwear and wrapping his ankles while still wearing pants at a length that I just could guess just feels comfortable to him. His jacket is also missing the rolled up cuffs around his wrist and instead sit as they are made with the jacket, which has a higher raised collar so as to show off less skin. Kishimoto does go as far as to mention this change in Naruto's appearance at the back of Data Book 3, stating that he wanted to give Naruto a more mature look and for him to stop looking so quote-unquote childish, with the biggest change coming from Naruto's headband, but Kishimoto says this was just due to difficulty when drawing Kid Naruto. These changes are all good in their own right, and making Naruto look more mature was the obvious move here, as Naruto is maturing. He himself has gotten over 2 years older, and age, when with the right crowd, should just make you more mature than you used to be. Aside from this, Naruto is obviously still a genin, as he hasn't been in the village in years to take the exam, so no change there. And he's obviously upset about that fact when hearing about his peers and how they've progressed through the ninja ranks, but we'll save that for later when we eventually get to them. So for now, we'll catch back up with Naruto later. Let's take a look at Sakura, another member of Team 7. This part is pretty much all going to be author's notes from Kishimoto, but he mentions how in order to make her an important fighter, quote unquote, he ditched her old clothes for something more resembling a karate outfit with a focus on close range combat. And in order to combine femininity with her hair was shortened to complement this new outfit. Sakura has changed wildly in the aspect of power, being able to deal insane damage to the terrain from just a single punch due to her training with Tsunade. This impresses even Kakashi, who with his Sharingan can see exactly what Sakura is doing here. To rapidly manipulate maximum chakra and instantly concentrate it into one's fist is no small feat. It takes an incredible amount of chakra control. Those are Kakashi's exact words. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Sakura has always had extremely good chakra control, even all the way back in the Land of Waves. It caused her to be really good at genjutsu, which Kakashi also comments on here. So it's only natural that after a 2-year jump, she'd have improved on that greatly. The changes to her actual character, however, are fairly minimal. She still acts virtually the same way, but signs of her maturity come through at certain parts, like after they meet Sasuke and he clearly wants nothing to do with them. Naruto drops to his knees crying, whereas Sakura tells him that crying won't do anything and they both have to be strong. Although you could simply argue that Sakura was simply less affected by this meeting than Naruto was, as it's hard to dispute that Naruto and Sasuke have a much deeper connection than Sakura and Sasuke do. She also has tons of medic ninja training, with Lady Chiyo eventually saying due to these two things, she is like a mini Tsunade. Kakashi seems to be more or less the same guy. He always acts smart when confronted with a problem. He's still powerful, far more so than the kids, and he is still just as laid back as he normally is. But Kakashi doesn't really need to grow, at least not yet. We just saw him develop into the person we came to know in part 1. Having him develop again off screen really wouldn't make any sense. He does have a new jutsu though, and it should be extremely obvious which one I'm talking about, but I'll save that for later. Another thing that should be extremely obvious at this point in the manga is that Sasuke is purposefully omitted from any of these new introductions, and we don't even get to see his character design aside from a black outline that Genjutsu Sai and his back while taking a nap until chapter 306, a full 62 chapters after the beginning of part 2. Sasuke being this disconnected from his teammates fits the theme of part 2 for sure, but this is something already well established in part 1. Of course, over 2 years it widens the gap as they've had no interaction since then, so of course the time skip serves the purpose of all of our characters have grown up and matured. As far as power goes, this skip could be 6 months, and if anything, it would just make the entire cast more impressive. Especially thinking in terms of Sasuke, who even after all this time, him getting this strong is seen as the result of some sort of performance enhancing drug, at least in the eyes of both Tsunade and Sakura. I guess if he got this strong in 6 months, he'd have been taking super mega performance enhancing drugs or something. Now let's briefly take the time to catch up with the rest of the Konoha 11 before moving on to Naruto's less than desirable power up from between the two parts. Neji we don't really get to see in action for some time, but upon meeting Shikamaru, we're told Neji's become a Jonin alongside both Kankuro and Temari. Everyone else, meaning Hinata, Shino, Kiba, Sakura, Ino, Choji, Tenten, and Rock Lee, were promoted to Chunin. Aside from Shikamaru, who ascended to the rank towards the end of part 1 just before the Sasuke retrieval arc kicked off. Naruto is surprised to hear that about all of his old friends, and then saddened by the fact that he's been left behind. This isn't explicitly drawn on his face, but there's a technique Kishimoto does with his backgrounds when Naruto feels singled out or empty, where the background goes completely black, and we see this in its most extreme form after he falls to his knees after failing to bring Sasuke back in towards the beginning of Shippuden. But when Naruto asks about Gaara, we get a different reaction from the manga than the rest of the characters. And this is fitting as Gaara seems to have changed the most compared to the rest of the cast, which I'll get more into later. Gaara obviously has become the Kazekage, and he's obviously matured a bunch since we last saw him in part 1. That was the beginning of seeing him change as a character, and it seems to be completed here and complemented by his ascension to Kazekage. We also get to see he's much more powerful now, fighting off an Akatsuki member and covering the entire village in sand to protect it from Deidara's bomb. In chapter 249, titled The Kazekage Stands Tall, we get to see Gaara mostly on the offensive, and then we get a nice dialogue between Gaara and Kankuro, where Gaara is talking about wanting to become connected to the people of his village, and he thinks that sharing your feelings with others isn't a weakness, it's strength. We get this seemingly flipped on its head when it's revealed Deidara dropped a C3 on the village to distract Gaara and weaken him to eventually beat him, which leads to Gaara's demise, seemingly proving him wrong. But because of his connection that Gaara had formed with Naruto, Naruto was able to touch the heart of Granny Chiyo, who brought Gaara back to life, so Gaara wasn't wrong after all. I mention this to say not much of our side cast seems to have developed much at all aside from ascending to these higher ninja ranks. Sasuke, Naruto, and Gaara all had pretty good development, Sasuke and Gaara being the major standouts here. Obviously the time skip is somewhat needed, but I can't find a great reason for it to be 2 years beyond making the characters more mature in the long run. But I think it speaks more for the bleak state of the world if these characters have to grow up quicker, and then it's not like the maturity is all that crazy. Naruto still does things like using the sexy jutsu in the middle of a public street, and it would also speak more to the prodigious nature of these kids if they can learn and adapt to the things that they had in part 2 at a faster rate. And I think people would be much more fair to Naruto, who didn't seem to learn much after 2 years of a time skip. Let's say if it was around 6 months or so. Now let's move on to Naruto's less than desirable power up. Okay, so over the course of this time skip, we know Naruto was training for a few things. I'm going to list them first and then elaborate on them afterwards. One is to gain better control of the Nine Tails. That seemingly stopped early on into his training. 2 is Genjutsu resistance. 3 is a bigger Rasengan, and 4 is he seems to get a little bit smarter. To elaborate on number 1, I think Naruto's lack of gaining anything from this training following the time skip makes it virtually pointless to bring up. Naruto still can't control Kurama's chakra, and with the seal weakening over time, we never even see him gain less than 1 tail, which we knew he could control even before the time skip. So this is utterly useless for Naruto's development, and we know it stopped early on in his training because when we see Jiraiya and Naruto have a flashback, it's when Naruto is a little kid that this happened, not his grown-up self. I guess you could say Naruto hit a growth spurt and looked younger for longer, but we don't really know. Moving on to number 2, Naruto's Genjutsu resistance is lackluster and does absolutely nothing. To be completely fair to Naruto though, he was up against the Genjutsu guy himself, Itachi, when this was on display for the first time, but I don't think that really matters from a story perspective. I don't think it's asking too much to have Naruto break a Genjutsu that isn't even an ocular Genjutsu, and let alone one we have never even seen before or will ever see again after this. But instead of this, Naruto is saved by Chiyo and never has to break out of a Genjutsu for the rest of the series. I'm going to bring this up a little bit later on and elaborate on it more, but for now we'll leave it there. Getting into number 3, yes, Naruto did learn a bigger Rasengan, but this would be a lot more special had the Rasengan actually been much bigger. Like say Sage Jiraiya's Rasengan, or not even that. 50% of the size of Sage Jiraiya's Rasengan would still be crazy, and Naruto's Rasengan does damage. Look at the crater that just the force of it making contact with Itachi created. It's extremely large. The last one to mention is Naruto getting a bit smarter, which mainly comes from his ability to defeat Kakashi during the bell test by spoiling his favorite novel, or I guess fake spoiling in this case. I think literally all of this would be fine to learn over the course of 6 months. Training to master the Nine Tails amounted to nothing, his Genjutsu resistance amounted to nothing, his big Rasengan is good, but it's just a broader interpretation of a jutsu Naruto already mastered in a short amount of time anyway. You know what would have showed more progress than this, unironically? If Naruto could finally use a Rasengan with one hand. The only time he has ever done this up to this point is when he was in his one tail form against Sasuke in the final valley by using the chakra from his cloak. He can't even use this bigger Rasengan in a more efficient way. And yeah, I hyped up the power it had when making contact with Itachi, that giant crater. But aside from that, what did it do? Nothing. It beat an Itachi clone after it ran out of chakra and couldn't use its Mangekyo Sharingan. Like I said earlier, I'll be fair in saying that this is Itachi of all people, but I don't think that it matters for the story overall, and I'll explain why here. This plot point establishes that the Akatsuki have soldiers at the ready and loyal to the Akatsuki. Why not have them fight Naruto and Kakashi? If you know Naruto can't do anything against Akatsuki members, then don't have the guy fight Akatsuki members. What really changes about the story if instead of clones, Team Guy and Team Kakashi take out full power Akatsuki grunts? Nothing. Literally nothing changes. And if you want to bring up how they are weaker than Akatsuki members to hype up the Akatsuki more, you can have one of the Akatsuki members say that they simply were not strong enough to join the organization, and have another one say that they were about 30% there, an almost identical situation to Kisame and Itachi being at around 30% when doing the fight. Also, to wrap up this video, I'd like to mention the possibility that Naruto being overwhelmed and not able to do much by himself might be the entire point of this story at the beginning. However underwhelming it makes Naruto seem after the time skip, and I can respect that, but I don't think that it being the point of the story makes it a good story, especially given how it's a stark contrast to how Naruto progressed throughout part 1, which spanned about half the time of the part 2 time skip. But that's pretty much all I have to say about this topic. If you liked the video, obviously leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're interested in topics like this, as I'm not going to stop covering them. And as always, have a nice day.